Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this to another level.
He said, it's easier to grow a unicorn than to transform a dinosaur. Right? And he used to say it all the time.
Karim, how did you meet Mike Beedle?
I met Mike. I traveled to Berlin, I believe it was, to take his enterprise Scrum course. Mm-hmm. So a few of us went out there, a few CSTs and CECs, and we went out to, because I heard he created this thing, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, and I'll go and do that. And so we sat through his course, and obviously we went out a few times in the evenings, and so that was where I initially met him. It was a really interesting couple of days, and then worked with him subsequently after that. But yeah, it was kind of spur of the moment thing, really. But I'm glad I went, for sure.
This is a recurring theme where, people talk about going with Mike, to dinners, and it seems like he was big on these dinners. And how was people have described him in a similar way, but what was your take, and how would you describe Mike both in class as well as in these more of social after the training events?
He's passionate, right? He was passionate about business and about business agility, enterprise agility, but he's passionate about so many things, right? And you never had a dull time when you were around Mike. Something interesting would always happen, an interesting conversation or some interesting food or some exotic cocktails or whatever it was. It was never going to be just another night when you're out with Mike. And I think that was the same with his work, right? It was never just another class. He would always have an interesting spin on it that was, in a lot of ways ahead of its time. So, you're always learning from Mike, for sure.
What were some of the things that you took from him in a sense of this is a new way of thinking, or maybe just the way that he impacted you and the way that you look at things?
Yeah, he's kind of one of the pivotal people in my career, because at the time I'd always been a Scrum person, and I was teaching less large-scale Scrum, but product development was and software in particular for me, right? So software development, product development teams, one team, multiple teams, programs, and beyond. But Mike encouraged and challenged me to take what I was doing in that space and apply it to the whole organization, which I was aware was happening and was necessary, but I'd never really gone down that road in earnest. And it was after his enterprise Scrum class where, he was talking about, in his words, subsumption, right? But we can just call that inspect and adapt on multiple levels, including at the organizational level, and actually creating truly agile organizations. Business agility is the term I would use now. And I'd never really gone down that road. And it was after a few conversations with Mike that I thought, you know what? Actually, we can just create organizations that can create whole new product services and whole business models while still operating with what they do. And that was a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm. What other ways did enterprise Scrum specifically impacted the way that you look at frameworks, or maybe? And how much do you see of enterprise Scrum in current frameworks? Because at that time, you didn't see as many. Maybe it was less, maybe a little bit of SAFe. That was, I guess, but the scaling, I guess, was just starting to probably in the years.
So you see bits of it, and I think for me the strength of it was kind of the idea, right? It was that we can apply these things more broadly than at the product level, and at the center of it was the canvases, right? He was really big on creating canvases, and you can inspect and adapt on the product on a cadence around this big visual canvas, right? And previously I'd been a fan of the business model canvas, and it fit quite nicely into that. And it was a big influence to me when I created the business agility canvas, because I was thinking about how can we visualize the transformation across all areas of the organization. So, I come at it from a slightly different angle, but I mean, there's no doubt that the canvases and the N-tier subsumption that Mike used to talk about in enterprise Scrum has sort of made its way into many different areas now, particularly my work, but lots of work too. And I really enjoyed the visual elements of the canvases and the fact that we can all get around and talk about how various parts of this organization fit together. I mean, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and just visualizing work, I think it just, there were several people that I spoke and been talking to about Mike, and one of the things that keeps coming, which is, what was he saying? Like, agilize everything or something like that. And then also visualize everything.
Yes.
What about, like, do you remember any stories that Mike would tell that stick, that still stick around? Like, do you remember anything that he said, or some of his experiences that?
I used to love talking to him about the lead up and the aftermath of that Snowbird meeting in 2001. But and I learned a lot about what was going on at the time from Mike. But there's a quote that sticks in my head, and I say it in almost every one of my leadership courses. And he used to say it all the time. I tried to find it written down somewhere when I referenced it in my book, but he obviously didn't write it down. He said, it's easier to grow a unicorn than to transform a dinosaur. Right? And he used to say it all the time. And I had it in my head. And then I started thinking, well, actually, how many unicorns appear each year, right? It's a lot. And how many big traditional organizations truly reinvent themselves to be agile organizations? Maybe Satya Nadella to a certain extent with Microsoft and higher potentially, but actually there really aren't very many of those. So the more I think about it, the more I think, he's actually right. It maybe is easier to grow a unicorn than to transform a dinosaur. And then I start thinking, well, why don't I just grow a unicorn then instead of trying to help transform dinosaurs? Because that would be a lot more interesting. But there you go. That's one of the most the quotes that stick with me the most from Mike.
That is interesting because, yeah, I mean, like, but what do you do, like, when the most of the world is dinosaurs, in a sense? Do you just let them die out? I don't know.
The
dinosaurs... what was his take on it? Like, was it more, I mean, he talked about agility across the whole organization, business agility. He was probably one of the first people to start talking in our circles to talk about business agility. What was his take on, like, changing the world, like, and dealing with dinosaurs versus creating unicorns? I mean,
his take was that a lot of them are going to die out, right? The dinosaurs died out, right? Apart from some birds, and some will be able to reinvent themselves, and the rest will die out, because the organizations that are growing, that are being born, they are born with business agility in their veins. And so they don't have to go through a big transformation, right? They already are agile. And so you're competing with those people now, and you're going to start to struggle. And I think the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see more and more of them disappear, and we'll see more and more of these agile organizations appearing. So it's going to be less a case of reinventing the old and more just of the new taking over.
Exactly.
I think we'll see a lot of those disappearing, and then I think he used to talk about, he used to predict that happening. When it happens, who knows? But I think it's coming for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely, I mean, like, it's the environment is becoming so disruptive that, like, if you can't, inspect and adapt quickly at organizational level, unless I joke around, unless you're a government agency or insurance company, maybe a bank, but those are getting more and more pressure. So
yeah, where there are very high barriers to entry, you can get away with it, right? But those barriers are coming down and down and down, and suddenly these competitors. I heard in the UK that one of the starter banks, the challenger banks, the so-called small challenger banks, now has a bigger market capitalization than one of the big established retail banks, like one of the 4 or 5 big high street. I mean, you think that's incredible. You never would have seen that coming 5 years ago. But in that short space of time, and what's going to happen in the next 5 years? These banks are going to have to up their game, right? And he was talking about this all the time, and so it's interesting to see it play out.
Yeah, awesome. What would you like to finish with about Mike? What would maybe to those that are listening, anything that you would like to maybe conclude with?
A story Mike brought. I did a CSPO for Mike once out in the US, and I remember saying to him, Mike, if there's any bit that you want to kind of do, because obviously Mike's a CST, Mike knows Scrum a bit, and I was like, I'll just pull you in every now and then. He said, yeah, sure, and. Quite early on, I was doing the bit about, talked about traditional project management, and then I started to do the bit about the manifesto, and how 17 guys came together. And then at the break, I went, "Hey, Mike, I'm about to do the snowbird thing. Maybe you should do this bit, given you were there." And he just sat back and he just went, "Nah, I want to watch you do it," and then just laughed. I was like, talk about intimidating. I'd only been a CST for not very long, and then suddenly I've got to teach a whole bunch of students about the manifesto, and Mike's sitting right at the front grinning at me. I was like, thank you for that. But that was who he was, right? He liked to have fun as well as work hard. So I survived it, and apparently I got it pretty much right. So there you go.